We're very honored today to have Guy Rolnick with us. This is a remarkable opportunity to interface with one of the greatest minds on both the economy and political events in Israel. We're going to take about an hour and a half. I will spend the first hour with Guy, and then I'll hand over to David Levy, and he'll spend another half an hour perhaps answering questions that you may have. The way this will run, first of all, let me thank profusely Shula, Sophie, David, Yaniv, Arno, and of course, Ben in San Francisco. The Boston team has been instrumental in pulling this together. The goal of this type of a conversation is very simple. We want you to understand what's going on, have access to some of the best minds in Israel and the United States, with the intent, and there is an intent, to take action on events that are occurring in Israel. An event which I think we all understand is effectively an electoral coup d'etat. Speaking with us today is Guy Rolnick. For some of us who know him, this is somebody that I have the greatest respect for, one of the most remarkable minds who's had a profound and deep impact, not just on journalism, where he founded one of the all-time great newspapers and analytic newspapers in Israel, TheMarker, but his impact across the board. Guy has numerous awards. Those awards, I think, probably been less to him than the impact that he's had on society, dealing with extraordinary people like Stanley Fischer, helping to influence the way people think and operate in Israel. And right now, Guy has made it very clear in his writings, and for those who have not read them, I urge you to do so, how clearly he sees the events of today and how clearly he sees what we must do to intervene. With that in mind, over the next hour, we'll explore some of those ideas. We'll ask him some questions. If you wish to ask questions, kindly raise your hand and we'll be notified of that. Don't be shy. This is an important moment. You don't often get a chance to talk to somebody like Guy. Now, for my part, for those who don't know me, I used to run a company called Teva, based out of Israel. That company provided 1 in 6 of all pills in America. So if you think Israel doesn't affect America, it surely does. It is a strategic partner. And those of us who live and breathe and salute that partnership need to know from minds such as Guy how we can weigh in, how we can make a difference. And I hope in this next period of time that we'll learn that. So, without much more ado, let me ask if you, Guy, would begin by laying out for us your view of the situation and what you think the future holds for us and how you think we can begin to intervene. And I have a number of questions, but I'll give the floor to you for the moment.
All right. Thank you very much, Jeremy. Thank you for those the opening remarks. So I want to start and hopefully end this talk with a clear message. A lot of people outside Israel who care about Israel maintain a policy of, let's call it, not intervening in Israeli partisan politics, right versus left. I think it's now a moment that you cannot justify this position anymore. As someone that was born in Israel and lived in Israel most of my life, I want to tell you that people that continue today to be neutral, in my mind, are not friends of Israel. Israel as a country started 3 months ago to slide to be an illiberal, authoritative country. And if one continues to watch it from the sidelines, or still is taking her time to form an opinion, I think you are not necessarily a friend of Israel. I want to be clear about my message here, and sorry for being so blunt. If let's call them this coalition that is leading the, as Jeremy said, electoral coup d'etat, the Kohelet coalition, if their plan is approved by the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, now or anytime in the future, it is all Israelis, and I would argue later all Jews living outside of Israel, will pay a high price. When Israel will turn into a pariah state, an outcast, when Israeli courts will lose their international reputation and standing, when the brain drain will accelerate, when the watchdogs or gatekeepers of the government will be castrated, and when corruption will become legal or very difficult to expose and combat, every Israeli will suffer. And it doesn't matter if she is a Netanyahu supporter, a left-wing voter, religious, ultra-Orthodox, or secular. Israel will be weak. Israel will be vulnerable. Social instability will increase. Our ability to continue to fund the welfare state, social net will diminish, and so will our ability to defend ourselves. An authoritarian Israel that, as I said, becomes a pariah will be a clear and present danger also for the US strategic interests in the Middle East, and I believe a threat to all Jews around the world. It will probably also lead to increase in anti-Semitism. Many Israelis took for granted the democracy in Israel for decades. We ignored the undercurrents in our society. We ignored many red flags, but we have waken up in the last 10 weeks abruptly. And now is the time for all the friends of Israel outside Israel to wake up and act more decisively than ever. I appeared in many places and talked about the pending threat of Israel sliding into being an authoritative country, an illiberal country, or maybe even a dictatorship multiple times in the last 3 months, since Minister Yariv Levin presented his new bills. But some people, and I can understand it, who don't know the intricacies of the institutional arrangements in Israel, and some of them that were exposed to the propaganda of this government in some of the US news outlets, thought that this is just hyperbole. Israel, we're just, changing the way we elect justices to the Supreme Court. Well, I want to make sure that we are all updated, and everybody knows at this point that this is a lie. Last month, Justice Minister Levin himself, in an interview for Channel 14, which is the local version of Fox News, mostly a mouthpiece of the government, acknowledged in a live interview his initial proposals would eliminate all the checks and balances in Israeli democracy and consolidate the judicial and legislative and the executive branches under the control of the ruling coalition. Again, this is Yariv Levin himself. So we must move forward now from the discussion of what is the meaning of these steps, because we heard it loud and clear from the people that are leading this coup.
Guy, thank you very much. First of all, everybody, there's been some question. This is all being recorded and you will have the opportunity to get a playback. Secondly, if you have a question, don't hesitate to put your hands up. Guy, your observations are a stark reminder to us all. We're going towards the 75th anniversary. Large numbers of people are going to Israel. So perhaps you might help us think through a couple things here. Number one, near term, given the call to arms that you are making and that others are making, other extraordinary leaders, what is it in your mind that you think those on this phone, on this Zoom and others can do to impact the course of events right now?
Yeah, so what we have learned in the last 3 months is that the Israeli democratic foundations are weaker and more vulnerable than we ever thought. All the institutions that should act as countervailing forces failed. I will start as a journalist. I will start, of course, with the Israeli media, the news media. Not only it failed, but in many ways, some of the news outlets, the most important ones, fomented the judicial coup in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years. As for other potential countervailing forces that failed, the opposition parties have proven to be irrelevant. And even the labor unions preferred, in my mind, to betray all the workers and basically continue to stay on the sidelines. So the only countervailing force in Israel democracy today that is taking the mantle and fighting against the forming dictatorship is civil society. And you said, Jeremy, call for arms. Yes, I agree. This is call for arms. Israelis and Jews around the world that want to protect Israel today must support Israel civil society organization. We have numerous grassroots organizations that were created in the last 3 months. They are now the protectors of our democracy. They are the one that are now fighting the propaganda. They are the one that are giving the countervailing force to news media that was co-opted for many years by the government. And we have to understand the balance of power here. We have the government of Israel that is using all its potential resources to quash the resistance. And we have civil society. And civil society here is very dispersed, as I said, with numerous organizations. And they need more and more resources to continue this fight. So pick the grassroots organization or any civil society organization that you know directly or from friends, and support them in any way you can. So that's number one. Number two is reach out to your congressman, to your, what politicians that are representing you, whether you're in the US or other countries around the world, and write to them and alert to them the danger of Israel sliding into being a dictatorship, and also what it means to America. We need every support that we can have. I think that Israel's continuing to be a democracy is of utmost importance to the US in general, and for the Friends of Israel in the US in particular.
Guy, thank you very much. You can see Guy's given a 2-step program here. One is supporting those who are protesting in Israel. And from all of us here, we'll make sure that you get a list of those organizations. There are some remarkable people. I'm sure Guy might even mention them, like Shikma Bresla and others who are standing up to this. But we will ensure that with the recording will come some names of the organization. The second is to write to your Congress people. And perhaps let's just explore that for a second. Guy mentioned some things a little earlier on. This is Israel's most important strategic partner. So Guy, the message that you'd like Congress to give and the Senate to give and the administration to give, can you describe the kind of message that you think they should be driving home and that all those listening here should be writing to their Congress people?
Yes, so we have to understand first, people say, a lot of people, push back on some of the messages that I try to convey here in the last 10 minutes, is saying this is a democratically elected government. So first we need to understand this government is a confluence today of special interests that are pushing this coup for their own private and narrow interests. Israelis never, ever voted for this coup. It wasn't an issue on the table. That's number one. It was also always in the, this issue was on the French alt-right. And not only that, now Israeli television is every week or 2 weeks conducting surveys and polls amongst the population. There is no support for this coup. And the support for this government is eroding faster than any point in time in the history of Israel. So in many ways, what happened is that 5, 6, 7, or 8 politicians, depending, we can elaborate maybe later, have captured the government, have captured the democratic institutions against the will of most Israelis. The American politician, the American Congress, should understand it. What is also very clear, very important to convey is that it is that saying that actually what we are doing is tweaking the way we elect judges is a total falsehood, okay? Israeli democratic institutional arrangements are very different than the US, okay? If we let politicians control the Supreme Court, as Yariv Levin himself said, Israel will become an illiberal and authoritative country. Ramifications for US-Israel relations are obvious, and the ramification for what the position of the legitimacy of the strong friendship and links between Israel and the United States, this will be now. This relationship will erode very fast and lose its legitimacy. This is a clear and present danger. And what is so worrisome is, and it's easy to see on the, specifically on the effect on the economy, is that the people now in power in Israel don't care. They are willing to sacrifice every national interest of the United States to promote their own narrow interests, okay? It's not a situation where you have 60% of Israeli population that have, that want authoritative country. This is not the case. It's a case of a small group of corrupt or how would you call very ideological people that have captured our democratic institutions.
Guy, this is a powerful message, and we can distill it, and hopefully those on this we will actually refine some of those. I'd like perhaps to just touch on and summarize some of that. Number one, it's a strategic partner of Israel. As the strategic partner of Israel, you have capabilities being undermined, you have a foreign policy being undermined, and indeed, Guy, in fact, they've turned over and abrogated agreements which have been signed with America. That's number one. Number two, as you point out, you have ministers who have specific interests and they're willing to do anything to get those moving. But what's equally important is that you have 55 convictions already on the books for those ministers, either for terrorism or for fraud. And I believe that no American politician wants to be associated with criminals. These are clearly criminals, the ones that he's mentioned. We're going to go into them individually in a minute or two. Number three, by America being aligned with a nation that is trying to become authoritarian, theocratic, misogynist, racist, this undermines American policies profoundly. So I think there are a couple of really good messages there. Guy, you're catalyzing them. There's a couple of thoughts which perhaps will percolate through people's minds. You've got a very well-meaning endeavor by the president. He's trying to bring people together. You've spoken about compromise and not compromise. Perhaps you'll lay out your thinking here as to how Americans should be thinking about, is there a route or not for compromise?
Well, I'm afraid that my message here will be very short and pointed. We cannot compromise in any way, okay? We cannot be half pregnant or to be in half democracy, okay? Once you start this process, and this is natural, by the way, this is not only Israel, history tells us this is everywhere around the world. Once you give unlimited power without checks and balances to politicians or anyone for that matter, they will want more, okay? All those compromises are actually what they are doing is just kicking the can down the road or cutting the, the big plan into small pieces and advancing them one by one. Now, any compromise that we will be willing to accept now will seed the next compromise, and we're just going to find ourselves sliding slowly. It may take 1 year, it may take 5 years, but all the same, the result will be the same. We need to understand, we were very lucky, yes, the word is lucky, that the coalition here made a big mistake, that we put the entire package of bills on the table once, and this way we can sue through them. So we have awakened up after, I would argue, decades of being asleep at the and ignoring and not actually exercising our duty as citizens. Now that we have waken up, and for the first time, Israeli liberal society is, not letting, is keeping their eyes on the balls for the first time for many years. We cannot go back to sleep. All compromise that are coming out of the Herzog, of the president of Israel, are just, as I said before, preparing us, will get us to be weak for the next, in the future. So we must oppose any of those proposals. And in many ways, what we should do now is set a new agenda. The agenda now, whoever controls the agenda of what are the challenges to Israel and what we should do are the people who initiated this coup. What we need to do now is take control of the agenda. and remind everyone what is really at stake and what are the real challenges that Israel is facing. And I think it's clear once you put forward the challenges that we have, is actually we do need a reform, but the reform that we need is pretty much opposite of the one that Levin and Smotrich and Kohelet are proposing. We need to strengthen Israeli democratic institutions.
Guy, you've touched on a terribly important point here. So compromise, not in, need to actually oppose them. And indeed, you need to put forward an agenda which is very different, in fact, the opposite of this. But before we go to that, and I would like to come back to that point, you touched on something which is remarkable. This government came in, and then within weeks, actually days, and probably hours, put actual bills on the table. They actually had them pre-written. Many of the words were constructed and sent to them by Kohelet and others. Can you walk through the preparation and the funding for how this all came about, and perhaps help people understand where this started and how it is supported at this stage?
Yes, that's a very good question. I think it's super important that people, specifically in the United States, how this all came about. So it started, believe it or not, in Philadelphia. We have two hedge fund guys, Jeffrey Yass and Arthur Danchik. Both of them, specifically Danchik, keep a very low profile, but they are very big political players. Danchik and Yass give extraordinary amount of money to politicians and super PACs in the United States, promoting mostly libertarian policies, okay? You can Google them and find everything about their support of politicians that were involved in the January 6th events in DC. Kohelet, that was, and Tikva, that was Tikva Foundation was there before Kohelet, and from Tikva came Kohelet, are basically following the playbook of American think tanks that have operated in the United States since the 70s and the 80s by changing the discourse and the ideas and the incentives of politicians, regulators, educators, scholars, of course, legal experts, and using all kind of methods, okay? Some of this message is just giving outright money, and some of them using, like we call soft dollar methods. What those think tanks were able to achieve in the United States in a span of 40 years, Kohelet and Tikva were able to do in less than a decade. Kohelet is wholly funded by Danchik and Yass, and Kohelet sold itself to the Israeli public for many years as we're just doing, research. But this is very manipulative, to say the least. What they were doing actually is they created the largest lobbying outfit in the country. What they do is they don't just do research, and the research, some people say, is very questionable, is that they build a powerful network of allies in the government in the parliament, and they write the bills. And not only do they write the bills, but through the network that they built and through what they do on social networks and in the media, they are also the one that giving a lot of services to those politicians who support or who carry their water or carry their bills. So we are in this absurd situation where we have two billionaires, hedge fund people. By the way, if you are more interested, Google the investigative pieces about them last year by ProPublica. The various ways that they use to avoid taxes in the United States through political donations and other tax loopholes. And we have a situation that two politicians, two billionaires that never lived in Israel, okay, are funding a coup in Israel, okay? And most Israelis, so in my newspaper, in TheMarker, we have written about the dangers of Kohelet for many years. But you know, since they represent themselves only as a research institute, people didn't pay attention. And people started to paying attention to the fact what Kohelet is doing only recently. And I think that people here in the US, in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, in DC, in New York, in Boston, should know who are Arthur Danchik and Jeffrey Yass and what are they doing in Israel. By the way, Kohelet to this day refuses to expose who are the people that it's Yass and Danchik that are supporting them. They never commented on that. So an investigation by Haaretz exposed it, but they continue to be in the dark. So we have a situation where two people that are totally in the dark, you know, they never gave even an interview and explain why they think that from Philadelphia, they can organize a coup in Israel, are people that are in a way unaccountable to any of the stakeholders in Israel. Here from the US are in many ways funding this coup.
Guy, these are extraordinary comments. You talk about American money funding a coup in a nation which is our strategic partner. If I take that to its logical conclusion, would it be correct in my interpretation of what you said, is that we have an organization in this country which is undermining the capabilities of a United States strategic partner? Is that a fair assessment, or is that just an assumption that I'm pulling together that is not accurate?
Yeah, look, so I want to be very careful here with, I'm not a legal expert, and I don't know how to call such an organization like Kohelet and its involvement in Israel. But I do think that it is high time that not only the US media, but the US Congress and other, there are institutions in this country that know to investigate such situations. And I think, first of all, that we need information, we need transparency here. We need to understand what's happening here. Kohelet is not transparent on what they're doing in Israel and how they do it. There is what they do above the line, which is, research, and what to do below the line, the way they are building this network and how money flows there. And I think that U.S. citizens, U.S. people, they should get answers from the various watchdogs in this country. Why is that all so opaque? I don't know if it's Congress that should move forward or one of the institutions that its tasks with such missions. But definitely, I think the people of the United States deserve to know what is happening here. If there are entities here in the United States that are taking such a significant role in changing, in leading a regime change in Israel, this must be in the light. This cannot continue to go stay in the dark.
Thank you. This is an extraordinarily interesting conversation, and we've diverted slightly to one organization, but we've begun to explore that. Obviously, a lot to be explored and to be understood here. From our perspective here in the United States, we have little view of what the implications are of what Kohelet actually does on the ground in Israel, aside from the political preparation for what is we're seeing happening there. Do they have an impact on education and the daily life of people in Israel today?
Oh, well, there were a string of reports actually lately that are resurfacing after there were some reports like that in the past that basically went unnoticed. So just to understand, one of the key players in Kohelet, a legal scholar, was actually behind the rewriting of the books where they teach civics in Israel, in Hebrew Ezrachut, okay? So 10 years ago, they rewrote some of the text and the books, and the people who helped rewrite it are the people that are getting funding from Kohelet. I'll give you another example. This is specifically for people who read Hebrew. If you go on Wikipedia in Hebrew and want to read some of the entries on the democratic institution in Israel, and you'll be surprised to see that a lot of what the stuff you're going to read is actually the positions of Kohelet. And the reason for that is that Kohelet is training in the last few years who are very active in influencing Wikipedia pages. So we have it in the news media, we have it in the education system, we have it in the universities, we have it everywhere. Everywhere that you can influence how people perceive democracy or liberalism, the money flowing from Philadelphia is present.
Let's walk away from that for a second, Guy. A lot of what happens in politics in Israel is very personal. Over the years, you've got to meet many of these people. You know Bibi, you know Smotrich, you know Ben Gvir. I think it's important for people to understand in America who we're actually dealing with. And perhaps you can lay out your impressions of these people. For my part, I've known Bibi for the better part of 30 years. I don't recognize him any longer. I don't understand the man. I don't really even begin to understand who he is relative to what he was. Without a doubt, he was a remarkable person. But perhaps you can lay it out. You deal with them intimately and have done so for many decades now.
Okay, so to be clear first, I know Bibi very well for many years, since he became a finance minister in 2003. At that time, I was the editor-in-chief of TheMarker, the newspaper, the economic newspaper that I founded. I know Smotrich from his involvement in the Knesset, in the parliament, in some economic issues and reforms. I don't know personally Ben Gvir, but I think that in the case of Ben Gvir, there is nothing actually that you need to know on a personal basis. You don't need to sit down with Ben Gvir to understand what does he stand for. He's pretty open and direct about the kind of politics that he believes in. But let's start with Bibi. If there are, I don't know if there are any people here on this call that support Netanyahu, and perhaps there are, and some people that think that actually behind this resistance it's just because some people cannot accept the fact that Bibi is elected time and again. This is totally untrue, and it's very simple, because the package that was put forward by Yariv Levin is something that Netanyahu himself opposed, and you can see it on tape, on videos, on the internet, everywhere. Netanyahu himself opposed all the measures. There were people that wanted to weaken or diminish the role of the Supreme Court in Israel for many years, people from the alt-right, mostly settlers. Netanyahu always opposed it, okay? So Netanyahu's positions today are diametrically different, in opposition to what he believed and what he said only 10 years ago, okay? So what happened to Bibi? What happened to Bibi is two things. One, that in 2015, Bibi gradually started to be intoxicated with his power. After winning in landslide the 2015 election in a surprise, he started to change. And at some point, Netanyahu started to believe that he is not an elected prime minister of Israel, but he is the king of Israel, or he's the king of all Jews around the world. And that can happen when you are, for so many years, in a prime minister, so many years in power. That's what happens to people. It's very difficult to be for so many years in power without power getting to corrupt you. And when power started to corrupt Netanyahu, he started to be involved in he started all those secret deals with the Israeli media moguls, with Moses and Alovich and Milchen. And he thought that he can get away with everything. And because of mostly bad luck and some of his close people that turned against him and delivered to the law enforcement authorities tapes, and he was indicted for corruption, for bribery, and for breach of trust. And Netanyahu should have stepped down immediately, like Olmert did before him. But instead of stepping down, he decided that he's going to start a campaign to delegitimize Israeli democratic institutions. And the way to do it first is to foment hatred, polarization, and conspiracy among the Israeli public. Now, in the news and the communication and the information ecosystem in the world today, and specifically in Israel, it's very easy to do it. In the world of social networks, it's very easy for people in power to tear apart our society, and this is what they've been doing. So it was social networks at first, and then what happened, that leading news outlets in Israel, mostly the TV channels, that wanted to compete with the social networks, started to adapt those messages and to also spread misinformation, hatred, polarization, and conspiracies. And it really pains me to say it, that it took less than 5 years to destroy the fabric of our society using those modern machinery of the media. I want to give you a little context here, my personal story here. So, just for people who don't know me, I lived in Israel for 45 years. 10 years ago, I moved to Boston and then to Chicago when I joined the faculty of University of Chicago. My kids went to school here in the United States. And 4 years ago, my oldest daughter was admitted to college here, but she decided that she wants to go back in Israel and volunteer to the Israeli military. And I was so happy with her decision, and her sister, younger sister, did the same 3 years after. I always assumed that all my kids will live in a liberal, democratic Israel. The kind of Israel that is now envisioned by the people in power in Israel today is horrible. This will cease to be the country that I grew up in. This country will be the opposite of what Benjamin Zev Herzl envisioned. If you go back to the writings, and I did it in the last couple of months, especially of writings of Herzl, especially his Alt-Neuland, his novel, you will see clearly that this government is essentially destroying at an amazing speed the Zionistic project. If these bills pass, you will not be able to recognize Israel in a few years. We are moving to something that is something closer to, I don't know, Poland or Hungary, or even worse. You need to understand that this package of bills presented by Levin are together eliminating all checks and balances or any countervailing force to limit the power of government in Israel. And once these bills pass, Supreme Court in Israel, who is basically today, under current arrangements, the most important check on unlimited power of the government, we will slide fast to be an authoritarian regime or worse, dictatorship. You have to understand, this is not like a regime that represses its citizens with violence and coercion, like, I don't know, Russia or China. But this will be a regime that is democratic only in name. It's going to be the democracy in the United States, going to the ballots every 4 years, will be just an empty shell. Once they will consolidate so much power, it would be very easy to start, for instance, to weaken the election rules. For instance, to ban Arab parties, and in a way make sure that they will control Israel for good.
Guy, it's a bleak picture, and I think you and myself and others will work hard to stop that. Let's just take a step back for 1 second. There are a lot of questions, and I'd like to bring some of these now to the fore. The implications of what you said, an authoritarian, potentially even a dictatorship, differs significantly from Poland and Hungary. Israel is surrounded by enemies, Iran, Syria, others, Hezbollah. We can keep on going down the list, and they must be laughing up their sleeve right now. But in the long term, there's 160,000 people in the standing army. There's 400,000 who are doing miluim. The real fighters will leave. The question is, what will that do to the country? And when you answer that, I'm going to hand over and ask David Levy if he'd unmute himself and ask the first question. And then following him, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask Nancy Kaplan, if she's still on, please, to ask her questions. And start just briefly an answer to my question, and then secondly, David Levy, and then thirdly, Nancy Kaplan.
Yeah, well put, Jeremy. I agree with you. We are not Hungary and Poland because we are not part of the EU. Being a part of the European Union and actually being geographically located in Europe gives you a lot of room for maneuver. And Hungary and Poland are, becoming illiberal democracies or empty shell of democracy. Their influence, it is, it is influencing, especially in Hungary, its standard of living in the country significantly. But you cannot compare it to Israel, because as you said first, Israeli relies first on the ability of the best and the brightest to serve in the army, both in service and then in the reserve. And people from the most important elite units in Israel are saying, we will not continue to do it. So it's a clear and present, danger. And then you have to remember the demographics in Israel, okay? Demographics in Israel has always been, we're sitting on a time bomb because of the growth of the ultra-Orthodox population that has very low labor force participation numbers, as you know. Only 50% of men ultra-Orthodox are participating in the labor, are contributing to the economy. And given the fact that in Israel we have social democratic roots, okay, that have eroded, but this is our roots. We have a universal healthcare system, which is dramatically better than the US, of course. Okay, go to Bloomberg and see where Israel stands in terms of the healthcare efficiency of the healthcare system and the outcome of the healthcare system, and where is the United States or many other countries. So we have universal healthcare. We have, which is eroding. We have universal education. Both of them are threatened by the growth of the ultra-Orthodox community. Now, we have to deal with it. Now, these bills that the Kohelet people now want to promote will actually undermine any possibility that we will be able to prepare ourselves for this challenge. The reverse is actually happening. Already we see parallelly to the Kohelet initiative, we see how they want to reverse actions of previous governments, including Netanyahu governments, of making sure that there are more incentives for the ultra-Orthodox population to start participate in the war. So yes, Jeremy, the answer is very clear. Whatever Poland and Hungary can afford themselves, we cannot afford themselves. And before I take some questions, I want to say something about the economy, something that is not clear for many people. So, as you know, the shekel has lost some 10% of its value since Yariv Levin announced the Kohelet judicial coup. But it is still pretty strong compared to most currencies if you look at the long durée, the last decade. The reason is that Israel is a very strong and rich economy. Specifically, you have to understand that, and of course, it's the strengths of the Israeli economy has a lot to do with the high-tech sector. But what people don't know is that it's not only that the economy was able to grow nicely most of the time. What's also too important, if you want to understand really what's happening here, that the state of Israel has a very strong balance sheet, okay? What it means is that the ratio of debt to GDP is very low, and we have a big surplus of foreign exchange assets over liability in most countries in the OECD. So just to give you some number, the foreign exchanges reserves of Bank of Israel are more than $200 billion, which is almost half of the total GDP. This is huge, okay? So we have tons of reserve. So this is the only reason that you don't see the markets disciplining now us, like you've seen in other countries that did really stupid stuff, is because of the balance sheet that we have. So it is very difficult for hedge funds, for instance, to attack the shekel or to start dumping Israeli government bonds like we see in other countries, like we see in last year in the UK, when we had this mini budget of Liz Truss, and then she was ousted. We have a lot of reserves, but this wicked, and as you succinctly said, the Jeremy, corrupt government can burn through this cash for 2 or 3 years. And the reason we have so much reserve is now helping this government conceal or hide that the economic effects of this coup will be devastating. You mentioned Smotrich. Smotrich, the Minister of Finance, is lying to the public on a daily basis because all the experts in the Ministry of Finance, okay, are warning him that the effects of this judicial coup will be devastating. The Ministry of Finance estimated that Israel will lose hundreds of billions of dollars of economic activity and wealth in the next couple of years. And we are, of course, already starting to see a lot of high-tech companies that are moving to Delaware, okay? They were registered in Israel. Now they found fast ways to register in Delaware. And it is only the beginning. The reason that we don't see much faster and more significantly brain drain is that a lot of people in Israel hope, like myself, that now that the civil society have awakened and risen, we will be able to stop this coup. But if we are not able to do it, the ramifications, it will be a cascading effect that will happen so fast. We're going to see huge brain drain. We're going to see international scientific organizations that will start to boycott Israel. We'll see funding cuts for Israeli researchers, and eventually you will see many of them leave.
Guy, it's a moment I could keep on talking with you for hours, but let me just summarize before I leave and thank you, and then I'm going to hand over to David Levy. Number one, we'll send a note on those people that you should be supporting in Israel. Number two, need to make sure that your legislators in America understand the consequences of what Guy is saying for our strategic ally. And three, we're hearing some discussion about how we should be really focusing on what's going on in America to facilitate the coup d'etat that's unfolding. Lastly, I'll just tell you one thing, Guy, that I find amazing. You know, I first got to Israel in 1967. I've been present in every single conflict in Israel since then. And even as CEO of Teva, I sat there in Ashdod watching the rockets come over in the factory. And to me, one of the more remarkable things that I note is the coming together of an extraordinary group of new generation of Israelis. And if I had to pick one thing that gives me hope, it's one, the thinking that you've articulated and others who are like you are the intellectual engine for what could happen. And two, the extraordinary energy, the vitality, the persistence, the togetherness that has happened. I confess, I'm an old guy, but I've met a lot of new friends, and it's a powerful cloth that's being woven. I believe that this will blow these guys out of the water, but it's going to be tough. So thank you very much for your time. It's an honor and a privilege to have the chance to speak to you. And David, are you going to take over now?
Myself and Yaniv Bejarano as well, also one of the Boston area organizers. Thank you so much, Jeremy, for handling this conversation and asking these pointed questions, and to Guy for addressing them. So I'm going to kick us off. Thanks, Jeremy. And people are also welcome to put their hands up for future questions. Otherwise, we'll also be scanning the chat here. Wanted to bring it back to the US and how dependent Israel is on support from the US, military support, financial, as well as in the political arena, the US veto at the United Nations and other forms of political support. To what extent is Israel really dependent and sensitive to this pressure? And how can we help to make that pressure really felt? If we're contacting our Congress people, or for example, the JFNA, the General Assembly of the Jewish Federations, is happening very soon, and I know there are some moves to try and get some protests there. How can we get our voices heard, and how effective will that be?
Well, I cannot say that I'm an expert in U.S. politics or the diplomatic relationship between Israel and the U.S., but clearly, you can never overestimate the importance of the friendship of United States to Israel. It's true that Israel is a very powerful economy, as I said before, and has a very strong military apparatus. And it's also true that the financial aid that Israel gets from the US is not as important as it was some 10, 20, or 30 years ago. But that's not really the question. Our entire strategic position when it comes to defense relies on the fact that everybody knows that Israel and the United States are partners, the strongest partners, of course, and the strongest allies yet you can think of. The stakes are huge here. We cannot risk that in any way, shape, and form. But if this attempted coup continues, United States will have a very hard time to continue its partnership with Israel, because Israel, as I said, we need to understand the Supreme Court of Israel and its independence is critical to the international standing of Israel. When we lose that, when international tribunals and institutions in Europe and in the US and all over the world will think that Israel does not have independent judicial system, the ramifications are going to be terrible, okay? And we cannot envision this. We are going to be in a situation that we never faced before. Everything will be put to a test, okay? Israel is going to be immediately the next South Africa. And as Jeremy said before, we are going to be in a way more precarious situation because we are not because we are in the Middle East and we are not part of the European Union or something like that. So we are playing with fire.
Okay, thank you. And Ben himself actually wanted to, who's helping with the technology here, wanted to ask a question. So there was somebody else that as well. So please put your hand up because I forgot who Jeremy was pointing to. So Ben.
Yeah, Guy, my question is regarding American politics. The American Congress does not make foreign policy. It advises the administration on foreign policy. The two lobbying organizations that lobby on behalf of American Jews are AIPAC and J Street. We've heard a lot from J Street, but we've heard nothing from AIPAC about this. Can you talk about that and what role they should be playing in this fight?
Oh, okay, so as we all know, AIPAC, that was supposed to represent Jews in America or Israeli or Israel or whatever, is now actually a lobbying group for the Israeli government. Okay, this Israeli right-wing government. And as I said before, when we started, people who continue to be neutral on what's happening now in Israel, when they see Israel sliding to be a democracy, are not friends of Israel. So I don't consider AIPAC anymore to be friends of Israel because they don't take a position on what's happening now in Israel, and we must all take this position. And again, it's not difficult to take this position because two reasons. One, Netanyahu himself warned in the past that how dangerous it is if we weaken the Supreme Court. And Yariv Levin, think about it. So think about AIPAC 2 months ago, okay? Yariv Levin is proposing a bill that all the experts say that will potentially get Israel to be a dictatorship, okay? AIPAC is silent. And then Yariv Levin shows up on television and says, you know what? The initial package that I put on the table that you ignored actually would turn Israel into a dictatorship, okay? And still we don't hear from them. So I think it is clear that if organizations in the United States that see themselves as friends of Israel should now do whatever they can do, their political capital, their resources, their people, mobilize everyone to stop this attempted coup.
Great. So thank you very much for that, Guy. And if people have questions, they can use the reaction button and click on raise hand. Ellen Katzoff, can you unmute yourself and ask your question? We can't hear you.
And if not, I know Nancy Kaplan was also next up in line. So
Okay.
while we're waiting, perhaps.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
I returned from Israel just a couple of weeks ago, where I was in Tel Aviv and attended many of the demonstrations. And one thing that was really interesting was there was a concerted effort not to bring in the subject of the occupation at the demonstrations. And you saw very, very little mention of it, etc. And I'm just wondering from your perspective, and basically it was not, the demonstrations were not people from the left, they were across all segments of society. So I'm wondering, do you have any perspective on, is there any connection between decades and decades of the occupation, without going into detail of what's involved with it, between the occupation and Kohelet and really this right-wing government? Are, some say that the seeds are basically in the West Bank for it. And I'm just wondering what your perspective of it is and where you come out on that. Thank you.
Yes, the answer is yes. The seeds are there definitely, and of course, occupation is occupation has a lot to do with what how Israel has evolved in the last 50 years. But I can understand why the people that are now marching in the streets don't want to talk about occupation. Because when it comes to the question of occupations, there are a lot of opinions among the Israeli public how to solve it, and can we solve it, and are we doing enough, and who are the partners, and so on. And at this point, when we are, when the blade of the guillotine is so close to our neck, and we need to stop this coup, we need to focus on the coup at this point. After we'll stop it, Of course, the question of the occupation will continue to be an important question that we have to deal with.
Great, thank you, Guy. Nancy Kaplan, could you unmute yourself? I know that you've been looking to ask a question for a while now.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity. My question has to do with the internal dynamics of the coalition. And I was wondering what you think the chances are of the government being brought down by the new demand now by United Torah Judaism that they won't support passing a budget unless the government first passes a blanket draft exemption law for them. And which would obviously be very controversial, and even a lot of Likud people would not want to do that. And do you think that do you think the government would be willing to give the Haredi parties that law, go to bat for them on the draft exemption, and what effect might it have on the budget, which has to pass by the end of May, or else the whole thing comes down?
Well, to speculate or to give a forecast about the Israeli politics or politics in general, it's very difficult. I think that when we're planning our next moves, how to resist this coup, we should assume that this government will be in place for another 4 years. Any other assumptions, I think, is irresponsible. This government and the elements of this government, the composition, of this government, is ideal for Netanyahu in terms of writing and enacting laws that will help him get out of jail card. So I don't think that Netanyahu will want to go to elections. If you've seen the last polls, actually, and the Likud lost anywhere between more than 20% of the votes in the last 6 weeks. So Netanyahu will do what is in utmost what he can do to make sure that this government stays intact. I also believe that Ben Gvir and Smotrich, their ability to be so powerful in this government is a confluence of events that happened in the last couple of years. I don't think they will risk it. The only thing that I can think of is perhaps Ben Gvir, because Ben Gvir is the only one really that is in danger electorally now, because Ben Gvir promised his voters that he will deal with the internal security issues in Israel and with terror and so on. And this is, of course, just baloney. Has nothing to do. He has no capability whatsoever. He's clueless, and he's not respected among the people that he should lead. So he is he was great as an opposition guy or someone on the streets, but now that he's in power, he cannot deliver anything to his voters. So maybe he is in a situation where at some point he'll decide that he's better off leaving this government. But I believe that the rest of the coalition will do anything that they can in order to maintain the composition of this government.
And that's obviously unfortunate. First, Rachel, you can ask your question. You just raise your hand.
Yeah, thank you. It's Avi. My wife is on the other line. And,
yes, okay.
Shalom, Adon Rolnik, kol hakavod להרצאה. My question is this. I saw the Face the Nation interview just an hour ago with Prime Minister Netanyahu. And it is a fairly tough interview, as you can see. And the concern we all have is this: if American administration does not put its weight, and Kohelet, which is the counterpart to Cato Institute, which advocate free market in the US but does not get into legislative issues, what we don't see in Israel, at least from where we are here in Boston, is another leadership emerging on the civil side. And if Guy guess is correct, we are stuck with the same government for another 4.5, 5 years. How will change be by? Because I don't believe the public can demonstrate weekend after weekend for 4 years. So what will be the mechanism to make sure that things will be stabilized legally? That's our puzzle.
Well, I disagree with you here. I think that the public not only can demonstrate, but I think that the public will can take an active role everywhere. I think that for the first time in Israel history, there is a large and growing group of citizens in Israel that understand that what democracy is all about. That democracy is not going to the ballot every 4 years, and they have to be much more involved in many possible ways for a democracy. And I think that the government already understands that when there are hundreds of thousands, and I hope that at some point we'll see more than 1 million people out on the streets, you know, the moment that people understand exactly what we're talking, what are the real dangers here, it's not very difficult to get people out on the streets. And I think once there will be such a huge popular support for the to the resistance, what is going to happen that the other democratic institutions that we have will be emboldened and strengthened. It is critical to have hundreds of thousands of people on the streets every week in order to send a message to the Supreme Court justices that they can strike down unconstitutional and laws. It is critical for the law enforcement leadership to see that they have support from the public the moment that they will have to enforce the law. And they, at some point, we will have a constitutional crisis where the enforcement agencies in the enforcement authorities in Israel will have to make a decision. Do they abide the laws of the countries, the judicial system, or they obey the government? And this is why civil society is so critical. And I think that we are already winning big time. If you look at the last polls and you see how the support for the Netanyahu party has eroded, you can see the power. You can see people that have been voting for Netanyahu, that have voted for Netanyahu, saying no more, okay? And I think that if we continue and we are continue the fight, and Netanyahu and his coalition government will see that they don't have support, that even though they technically can do anything because they have what we call in Israel 64 fingers, still you need much more than 64 fingers if you want to restructure Israeli democracy. So as long as we continue, as long as we don't bite the bait of those compromises, which in my eyes the most worrisome and the biggest danger that we have, I think that we are going to win.
And that's a very optimistic note. Roy Bar, could you please unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much for a great lecture and insight as to what's happening in Israel. And my question is that Now that the protest is all about basically how Israel society that used to be Yeh Beseder, which is kind of everything will be okay, is bankrupt. Basically, in 75 years, we have no constitution. And don't you think that we first need constitution before anything else that we can move forward? And if we're not having a constitution, how are we going to reconcile the differences? So we first need to have basic rights that are being protected by constitution, not by just fundamental laws and anyone can strike or not strike down laws. We need a constitution. How do you think we're going to resolve and get there?
Well, I'm not a legal expert or constitutional law expert in any shape and form. A constitution is important, and constitution is one arrangement that can have a significant role in maintaining a vibrant democracy. We cannot wait now at this point or put all our energy just behind, let's say, the constitution. No, at this point, it will be very difficult to get to agreement on constitution, especially today. For instance, let's say that 4 months ago, we would sit down with this new government and with the public sentiment that we had up until 3 months ago and say, let's write a constitution. I think that this constitution would be horrible, okay? Because if you look at the public sentiment that we had up until recently, there were a lot of illiberal and undemocratic ideas out there. And the kind of constitution that we would get out of this discourse, out of those sentiments, will be detrimental to what we want to achieve. So the idea that, okay, we made a mistake, they made an attempted coup, now let's bring a constitution, sign it, and we'll move forward, that doesn't work. For the kind of constitution that we want to see as people who hold democratic and liberal values high, we need to engage in a very long and difficult and gruesome process of reevaluating the values in our societies. And as you said before, going back to being much more involved in politics. I think that writing now a constitution is probably not going to happen. And the kind of constitution that we can agree on at this particular moment will probably won't be the kind of constitution that will really safeguard Israel democracy. So we have to work piecemeal. And first we have to stop this attempted coup. And then we can start a process of reevaluating a lot of the assumptions about our democratic institution. There is no quick fix here.
However, there's never a good time for a constitution. However, there's a framework, which is the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah, I agree that it's a good framework. I agree it's a good framework, but the discussion whether Israel is first a democratic country or a Jewish country has never been resolved. I think that theoretically now I'm speaking. Okay, I'm just spitballing now as you speak. So think about the kind of constitution that we had. If we had an agreement on something 6 months ago, and if we have an agreement on something today, they'll probably be very different. Why? Because the last 3 months have been amazing, okay, in terms of Israel is waking up to thinking about what is it really the strengths and the challenges to Israeli democratic institutions. So this is a process, and you cannot, as I said, have...
Absolutely. Yeah, the other question,
Okay.
just, I'm sorry, I have
Well, I think we're going to be
sorry, I have a quick question, just a follow-up question. more on the local level, it seems to me that all the organizations that I talk to, and I don't talk to too many, but a lot of the leaders in the Jewish community, synagogues, and like in Boston where I live, like CJP, they're all on the fence. They're all seems to be very intimidated by their donors, like AIPAC, for example. And there's a correlation between conservatism and synagogues and AIPAC and those kind of crowd. And it's very hard to get them off the fence. So privately, there will be obviously with the protester, but politically, they're on the fence. So they don't really have a strong opinion and say, what do you want? Why are you complaining about, about Judaism, or people in America cannot do much. You're very angry about Israel. So don't target this anger towards us. Even Biden cannot do anything. So obviously Bibi is not going to listen to those local Jews. What do you want us to do? That's kind of feedback that I get. What do you propose we answer those kind of feedbacks?
So Roy, I don't know if you, when did you join the conversation? I started this as the reason that I'm having this conversation with all of you today is because I had a clear message to you that I want you to convey this message also to your local leaders and grassroots activists and so on. It's a moment that you cannot justify anymore a neutral position in Israel. You have to take a side here because Israel is about to become an outcast in the world, and nobody wants this to happen. Everyone will suffer. Is Israel's, whether you're voting for right or for the left, the Jews outside of Israel, and the United States at all. If you are still on the sidelines, there are only two options here. One, in my mind, again, you are not a friend of Israel, or you didn't put your, you didn't bother to understand what's at stake and what is happening. So if you're a true friend of Israel, it's high time. We don't have a lot of time.
Hey, I want to thank you so much, Guy, for sharing generous time here, an hour and a half, and giving us kind of a bleak picture of the situation in Israel, but at the same time, there's some optimism about the awakening of civil society and even the ability to strengthen democracy going forward and how we leverage that. There have been quite a few questions in the chat about specific ideas for contacting your Congress people or your senators, and maybe working with your local communities. So we will be sharing some resources, both for speakers as well as templates for letters and even meeting congressional people. J Street did organize a letter that I think 92 Congress people signed just before Biden put his pressure on. So there are channels that can be effective, and we'll be sharing some of those. I want to thank everybody for joining us, for your questions, for your interest. Jeremy, who had to leave, and again, Guy, will be watching out for more of your columns and insights. And we'll be making a recording of this available along. And thanks very much. Anything else, Yaniv, that I've forgotten here?
Well, I just wanted to add that I put in the chat a WhatsApp link to join our action group in Boston that we will announce the protest. We've been protesting in Boston for, this will be the 10th next Sunday. And we're also doing a lot of activities, including sending letters either within the Jewish community or to as David mentioned, to congressmen and senators. So please join if you wish to take an action.
Mm-hmm. And there's also a link I put in. There's a Facebook page for Unacceptable nationally, North America as well as worldwide. So you can follow, depending on what city. I know people are joining from all different cities here. You can find out local activities as well. Unacceptable.org is Ben just put that there as well for their webpage. Okay, so we'll say thanks very much. Shavua Tov to all.
Thank you very much, Guy. It has been enlightening. Much appreciated.
Yep. Okay. And thank you.